Greetings and welcome to the channel. This is Mikhailov from Team Retro, where we like retro games and the devices that bring them to us. So I've spent quite a bit of time with the Retroid Pocket Mini V2.
You're honestly going to sit there and watch this man do a review on something that's not an Anbernic?
You honestly want me to hit him again? You know, I don't want to get personal here, giving you a hat and all, but you're an awfully bad influence.
Oh, I'm the villain here, yet you're standing there shamelessly as you go through his wallet.
You know what? I think you have a point. We always did make a good team. Okay, let's go ahead and harm our friend.
We're going to take a look at the whole process of modding the screen, and we're going to do some comparisons, and thankfully, there's not going to be any more Anbernics to bother us. So He's right behind me, isn't he?
My God, he knows.
He's got another Anbernic, doesn't he?
What are you waiting for? He's got a perfectly hittable head.
Just give it to me.
He's being awfully cooperative.
Guess we're reviewing an Anbernic.
Well, all's well that ends well, right?
At time of recording, you can order the RG34XXSP direct from Anbernic's website for about $67 before taxes, with shipping to the US starting at $19. The model I am showing in this video is a yellow model sent to me by Anbernic for the purposes of this review. As is always required, all opinions are my own, I'm not being paid, and they are not seeing this video before it goes live. It's time to hop on our mount and ride into Spec Town. The Anbernic RG34XXSP is powered by an H700 quad-core CPU. The GPU is a dual-core G31MP2. The device has 2 GB of LPDDR4 RAM. Storage is handled through a dual micro SD card system. One SD card is for the OS, and the other is for expandable storage. A 64 GB SD card is provided for operating system storage out of the box. The screen is a 3.4-inch IPS screen with a resolution of 720 by 480 and a 3:2 aspect ratio. And yes, we'll get into the screen a little bit later. Giving the device life is a 3300 mAh battery. For connectivity, this handheld has Wi-Fi built in as well as Bluetooth 4.2. The device ships with Anbernic's 64-bit Linux operating system. It's time to unbox the unit, where we'll find the device itself, and then there's the usual screen protector, wipes, instruction manual, and USB-C cable. Okay, so let's go ahead and tour the device. We're going to start here at the top, where you have your charging port. This is also an on-the-go port for USB storage. And you also have mini HDMI out here, so you could plug this into an external monitor or television. And then, of course, you have the shoulder button. So you have your bumpers and your triggers here. These are digital. They are very clicky, very similar to the original RG35XX. So let's go ahead and let's give a listen. So they're not too loud. As a matter of fact, I have a 35XX SP here. Let's do a comparison. 34XX, 35XX. About the same. So they're probably using very similar parts. In fact, these buttons look pretty much exactly the same if you were to put them next to each other. The only difference I really see between these two devices, other than the joystick inclusion, is the fact that this is just a little bit smaller. It's just a little less wide than the 35XX, which is interesting. I'm going to put this aside for now. On the side here, you have your 2 indicator lights, you have power, you have reset, and you have a SD card slot. And then on this side, you have your volume control and your primary SD card slot. Nothing here on the back except for a bit of a textured bump, which I kind of like. It's just a pattern designed, and you don't get that on the original 35XX SP, but what you do get is access to the battery, and you don't get that here in this model. On the bottom, you have a single 3.5mm headphone jack, and then you have a lanyard attachment. And then inside the device, you have the 3.4-inch 3x2 aspect ratio screen. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. Menu button and your D-pad and face buttons. A little upset that they went with the standard face button layout as opposed to what they did with the 34XX, where they actually made the B and the A buttons a little bigger to match the size of the Game Boy Advance. And I kind of wish they did that here, but alas, this is what we have. We have two joysticks, kind of odd feeling and very much out of place. They're small, they don't work that great. The range of motion is okay, but they're also recessed. And so let's test the D-pad and the face buttons for loudness. Still loud, but definitely a little bit more muted as opposed to the 35XX, where things are just clickier and much louder. And same with the face buttons. They're clicky, but they're not as clicky as the 35XXSP. So here's 35XX for comparison again. Again, super loud, super clicky, not as clicky. Now, we are going to talk about which one of these two I recommend a little bit later in the video, but in the meantime, let's keep the focus on the 34XXSP and let's do the contra test. There doesn't seem to be a lot of wiggle room here. If I wiggle my hand back and forth, I am triggering an accidental diagonal here and there, but for the most part, it seems pretty rock solid. I seem to be getting the diagonals I want to get. And if I don't want diagonals, I'm not going to get diagonals. So this doesn't pass with 100, but I would say it does pass with a 90. So still an A-. I'm not good at fighting games by any stretch of the imagination, but I am failing Hadoukens here like you wouldn't believe. Yeah, I am not getting any of my special moves off here. So I'm going to call this a complete and total failure of the Street Fighter test. I would not play fighting games on this thing at all whatsoever. Out of the box, Anbernic software is fine. I recommend you stay in the RA game menu as you'll have full access to a build of RetroArch. However, if you're looking for a more simplified game experience, there is another menu that will also launch the games. You could then hit the menu button for a limited suite of options like save and load states. There isn't much here, but if you're looking for a plug-and-play experience, this is likely going to be what you're looking for. That said, there are a couple of things about Anbernic's stock OS that I just don't care for. They have shaders preloaded into their RetroArch configuration. This can cause performance issues on this chipset depending on the game. If games don't look right or don't perform as you would expect, head to the RetroArch settings by pressing the menu icon, go into Video Settings, and turn off shaders. Then, in the main menu, go to Configuration File, and save current configuration. The other thing I'm not a fan of is that these systems come preloaded with ROMs. I understand Anbernic is trying to provide an out-of-the-box experience, but I prefer to source my own ROMs. This is where custom firmware will come into play once devs get their hands on this unit. On my original 34XX and on my 35XXSP, I have a build of Rocknix set up strictly as a Game Boy Advance machine. So it boots into Emulation Station and then immediately goes into the GBA section where I can pick a game and boot right in. Rocknix is also available for the 34XXSP at time of recording. However, I haven't tried it yet on this device because there's currently no sleep mode available with this custom firmware, which means that the lid won't sleep on close. This is kind of a deal breaker for me, so I'll more than likely switch to a different custom firmware as soon as it becomes available. Thankfully, there's a lot of support for these XX devices out there. So once more community devs get their hands on this unit, there will be much better options than the stock Anbernic experience for those who want it. Okay, so let's get ScreenGate out of the way. This is an issue that cropped up with a different handheld, the Retroid Pocket Mini. This handheld originally shipped with what we thought was a 4x3 inch screen, And turns out that this was the same screen that was on the iNeo Pocket DMG and the Retroid Pocket Classic. The bezels were actually hiding part of the screen. This normally would have been fine, a cheap solution to a simple problem, had the screen been tuned properly. This issue was finally exposed because shaders weren't working properly for those who like to use them, and this ultimately resulted in the Retroid Pocket Mini 2, which, to me, is a much better device than the handheld that came with the original 4x3 resolution that was hidden by the bezels, because we have a much better screen here. Expect more content on this device very soon. Fast forward to this past week where the Phawx originally uncovered the possibility that the screen was a 4x3 screen with the pixels cut out and hidden by the bezels to be a 3x2 aspect ratio screen. This apparently also seemed to be the case for the original Anbernic RG34XX, a cheap solution to a modern problem of us GBA fans wanting a 3x2 screen in a form factor reminiscent of the Game Boy systems we grew up with. Now, I had an entire segment planned for this part of the video right up until 11:23 p.m. EST on a Sunday night when I went to go double check my sources and discovered that the Phawx had posted a correction stating that his conclusions were flawed and that these two devices actually do have a 720 by 480 3x2 aspect ratio screen. I'm not going to show that segment anymore because all the comedy and the comments I had were based on Carrie's original video, and I'm kind of glad that I couldn't publish this review until now because it gives me an opportunity to reflect on a different screen issue that the 34XX has. The issue here is that they could have easily just fit a 4x3 screen here with less bezel. Oh wait, they already did this. It's called the Anbernic RG35XX SP. So why is this important? Well, the 35XX SP has a 3.5-inch 4x3 aspect ratio screen. So retro console systems like NES, SNES, and Genesis look better on this handheld than on the 34XX or 34XXXP, which are two handhelds clearly meant to emulate Game Boy Advance. When emulating GBA on the 35XX SP, however, the black borders really aren't that big of a deal, and you could get creative with bezels to actually make the experience more authentic and nostalgic. And that's why I think in the end I would recommend the 35XX SP over the 34XXSP. The 4x3 screen gives you more choice to decide what to do with your content. You can still enjoy 3x2 content, and you can play console systems at a native 4x3 resolution without things being squished. And the 34XXSP 4x3 content just doesn't look quite right because it's a bit smooshed and it's a little bit letterboxed. The exclusion of a 4x3 inch screen when they very obviously could have used one is even worse because the screen is a nicer IPS display than the 35XXSP. The color saturation is just a little bit more clear and a little less washed out. Putting the two systems next to each other shows this, and even with that slight difference with the screen colorization, I still recommend the 35XXSP because of the 4x3 aspect ratio. The 34XXSP just doesn't make sense to me because Anbernic just took the 35XXSP, made the screen smaller, made the system a little bit smaller, and added joysticks on the bottom. And these joysticks make zero sense to me. They don't feel great for starters. On top of that, there's absolutely no content that I'm going to consume on this device that uses these joysticks because not only is the screen aspect ratio not right for those systems, but it's kind of pushing the limits of what this chipset can do anyways. If Anbernic wanted to add joysticks, then they should have stuck with that 4x3 screen instead of committing to a 3x2 with bigger bezels. Alright, let's wrap things up with my final thoughts, starting with the positives. The hinge is good. In the time I've been testing and using this device, I never felt that the hinge was going to break. I know that there are some handhelds out there where this isn't the issue. I also can't speak for long-term use or wear and tear over time. For the moment, however, I'm not concerned about the hinge breaking. This makes this handheld a nice, portable, pocketable clamshell, much like the GBA SP that this device takes its inspiration from. This handheld has the same chipset as the majority of Anbernic's XX line, so the custom firmware we all know and love will be available for this handheld sooner rather than later, and if you're looking for pixel-perfect Game Boy Advance, this handheld will do that. But it's not perfect, and let's talk about why, starting with the screen. I think the 34XX SP would have been a more versatile device if it had a 4x3 screen, giving us the choice as to how we want to view our content. As a result, like the 34XX before it, this handheld is really only good for GBA and not much else. This makes the decision to include joysticks on this handheld a confusing one because no system that uses them will look good on that aspect ratio screen and they won't perform that great either. Finally, the 34XXSP just doesn't make sense to me in a world where the 35XXSP exists. Honestly, just get that or the original 34XX. They're more readily available, and depending on what you're looking for, they just do a better job at being retro systems than the 34XXSP does. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Is this a device for you? Are you passing? And what do you think is the best use case for something like this? And please feel free to continue the conversation on the Retro Handhelds Discord, where you can find me hanging out in between videos. And if you want to support the channel like these wonderful people on the screen, you can do so by going to my Patreon page. Links for all these places are in the description. But that will do it for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and please be sure to like and subscribe if this video was helpful to you in any way. Every smash of that button helps the channel grow and allows me to get more content out to you. Until next time, bye for now, and don't stop believing.